Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hi, and welcome to the ISO Show. I'm delighted to be joined today by Gillie Fairbrother, who is the Global Responsible Business Officer at Davies Group. And we're going to be talking about verification today. Gillie has a wealth of information and knowledge about global responsible business. So I'm absolutely delighted that you're on the ISO Show today. Gillie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here today and including me in your work and research as well. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I think it's been actually quite a long time coming to actually talk about the research, and I'd like to thank you, for your participation in the research that I've been conducting over the last few years. For those, I think some of our listeners who have been tuning in for a while will probably know that I've been doing a master's of research on a topic that I'm very passionate about, which is looking at the demand and drivers of GHG verification for organisations across the globe, and looking at the multidimensional impact of that. And Gillie very kindly provided some feedback on my survey questionnaire and also participated as well, which was fantastic. So we're going to be talking about some of the findings from the thesis, and Gillie's going to be hopefully providing some context today in relation to some of those findings as well. So really interested in diving into that in more detail. But before we do that, Gillie, would you like to just provide some context in terms of your background and how you got involved in sustainability and what your role involves now at Davies Group?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose as I see myself somewhere near the middle of my career, when I was younger and at university, choices like sustainability weren't as prevalent and weren't as much of an option. So it's definitely something that I've developed over time. I've done a lot of work working for myself. I've run a wellness business before. I've always worked with sustainable brands and done a lot of cultural advocacy, particularly in the LGBTQ space. So when I sort of stepped into the corporate world, working in something like ESG, responsible business, was really a dream come true. I've led ESG at a number of companies, from US tech firms to Davies now, which is a service provider for the insurance industry. We're in 22 countries. And I really think what I like about it is the diversity, because there's so many different things that I get to work on every day. And I suppose it is that eternal optimism that you need to stay motivated in a role like this with such big, ambitious goals.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So I'm just going to begin with looking at some of the driving factors around verification. Now, the research interestingly found that 29% of organisations cited that it was for market-driven reasons as the primary reason for seeking verification, compared to just 12% who cited regulatory compliance, which I was actually quite surprised at when I went through all of the data, both from the survey and from the academic papers and information that I was researching. And I was just wondering, which of those two forces was the dominant driver, would you say, at Davies Group, and what specifically triggered the decision to pursue independent verification?
Yes, absolutely. And I'd say regulation definitely plays a factor, particularly when it comes to horizon scanning and what's coming and everyone wanting to be prepared. But I will say, in a tough market, it really does have to be market led, looking at things like client requests versus client contractual obligations. And as soon as you start to see those contractual obligations, obviously it becomes a no-brainer. And I've always driven sustainability and responsible business work around the revenue benefit of doing this work, which some critics might say is not the right reason. The right reason's at heart. I care about these things deeply, but I also am aware that we're in a business, and I don't want businesses to be looking at things like sustainability as the nice thing to do. It should be your business stakes. This is how you operate. So I do think that correlation between market demand, contractual obligations, but also recognizing that this is the right way to do business, has been the biggest driver for us.
Mm-hmm. And with Davies Group operating in the insurance and professional services sector, it's obviously a sector that's built on the credible assessment of risk. At what point would you say did you think that the leadership team recognised that unverified carbon data actually represented a credibility and governance risk that was actually inconsistent with your high professional standards at Davies?
Yeah, and luckily for me, I feel like this one's been easy, and I've done this work in places where it hasn't been so easy. But as you mentioned, we have very strong governance practices, and when I think about ESG, or people, planet, and purpose as we look at it, I've never really had to worry about making any improvements in the governance or the purpose parts, because we're already performing very well in that space. We're a highly regulated market that we're operating in. So doing things like TCFD, and we actually did TCFD on a voluntary basis. We hadn't triggered, but it was an amazing exercise to do, to demonstrate to leadership, look at the risk that you perhaps haven't thought of, not only from a climate perspective in terms of, things like supply chain or things that might affect us physically, but also how's that going to affect the industry? How is that affecting where insurance players are moving around the world? Think about places like California, Florida, and how that is having a bigger impact on the industry. I think we're lucky on that one, that people understand the risk and are willing to quantify it properly. Make sure that data is good, and as we're talking about today, making sure it's audited. It's not sort of finger in the air. It's how can we prove some of these things?
Yeah, and we've certainly seen it. The difference in the quality and the governance of ESG practices in the regulated environments compared to non-regulated, and there is a vast difference for sure. So obviously one of the key things when you're looking at creating a GHG inventory against a standard like ISO 14064 or the GHG protocol is that it's for some it's quite daunting creating a GHG inventory. Could you just walk me through what Davies Group's GHG inventory and reporting looked like before independent verification was introduced, and just to kind of walk me through kind of the ownership of that and how you went about compiling it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, being totally open, before I joined Davies, this was managed by a third party because we didn't have the skill in-house to do it. And I joined the business, worked with that third party, which, a lot of people take that approach. But I think it's quite hard for people who are not in the business, that understand the business, especially when it's as complex as ours. We have 3 different divisions, multiple service lines. And people are busy, and you've got someone from outside coming in and asking for information. You're always going to have that barrier. And of course, working in Excel spreadsheets, I would say that was as good as it could have been, but not as good as it could be. And I think as we've started to grow those processes, bring that talent in-house, and have specific knowledge within the business that now manages that totally internally, and a better knowledge from our stakeholders, our data owners, building relationships with our real estate teams, with our expense platform, with our travel platform. So we're getting better data and people are understanding what they're being asked for. I will note, though, that we are still working on Excel spreadsheets. And, as you all know, we've advanced to reasonable assurance. So, I've definitely had the conversation and looked at using a tool, which is obviously, a fair amount of money. it's still something, you know, I think about, but bearing in mind we're doing quite well with our assurance, there's plenty of other places where those funds need to be spent on impact. So if I can spend less on the data, I can spend more on actually things that will make a difference and bring those numbers down rather than just getting the quality reporting. So yeah, a bit of a tipping point there, but I'd say it's improved so much.
It sounds like, yeah, you've certainly been on the journey from, you know, outsourcing that, you know, the data collation, calculation, etc., to bringing that in-house, refining the systems. And I know obviously Davies Groups has grown significantly as well over the last few years that you joined the company. So I know that it's, you know, the goalposts are always moving, you know, from a carbon data perspective for sure. So yeah, okay, great. So there are pressures coming from different angles. You know, mentioned about, you know, the regulatory drivers, but there are other stakeholder pressures as well that came up in my research. I actually identified 4 main driver categories, which I won't go into right now, but it'd be interesting to hear from you, you know, specifically what kind of stakeholders we're asking perhaps questions about Davies Group's sustainability data. You know, obviously we've got a broad range there from clients to institutional partners, investors, or others. And just interested to see where you're getting asked the most difficult questions from those stakeholder groups.
Totally. And whenever I present to anyone about my department and what we do, probably the second slide that I present is on our stakeholders. Why are we doing this? Why are we here? Who cares? Who's asking this? Up front and centre, I always put employees. We are a people business. We're a people-led business. We're working in an industry where 30% of the workforce is probably going to retire in the next 10 years. And we're trying to attract a younger group of talent who want to work for a business that has a good purpose and is a good company. Whether that be when they're looking on our website, whether that be when they speak to our talent teams, or when they get here and they see if it's real and if it's true. So I feel it's our responsibility to our employees to report on what we're doing to be a responsible business. And then, of course, we have our clients who are incredibly important. You know, we're a private equity-backed business. If we're not making money, we're not a business. So we're balancing that. And then, of course, we have investors. We have our regulatory requirements. I'm thinking through my PowerPoint in my head. And then for me, suppliers is really important because even though they're not putting pressure on us, without their support, we can't meet the goals that we've made to the public, our employees, our investors. So they would be the main groups for me.
Okay. And are there any conversations in particular that are memorable for you that you can recall for a specific meeting or anything at all from those conversations, and that could have kind of resulted in, you know, moving the needle further? And it could have been, I know that you're involved in lots of different amazing projects to make a difference.
Absolutely.
Is there any one that in particular that kind of landed with you that is quite memorable?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's probably loads. And if I think about, you know, the ones that are big ticket items like clients and investors, but the one that I care about the most is when, and I hear this a lot, but I remember one specific time that someone had joined the business and reached out to me and said, I've noticed you've got employee resource groups and you've got a sustainability group. You know, I'd love to know more. I'd love to be involved. And we were sort of having a chat. And they said that when I was going through interview process, I went to the website of the 3 companies I was interviewing for. And yours was the one that had a responsible business page. It talked about the volunteering things that you do. It talked about your net zero goal. And I thought that is the kind of company I want to go and work at. And to me, that makes it worth it.
Absolutely, yeah. And then you're bringing in a whole new generation, aren't you, of people that can actually help you to drive this strategy, because I know that you've got ambitious targets and plans to help you to drive that forward, because obviously I know that you've got a huge responsibility at Davies Group, but you need, you know, it takes a village, doesn't it, really, I think, to
Totally.
in order to be able to provide that support in that community, really, to make it all happen.
And it's not just about the PR and the communications right. I'm an employee of Davies. I deeply care. Right? This is something that I want people to know that we're doing because we are doing good things. Yes, we do a lot of compliance reporting, but the best part for me is sharing those real wins where we've invested in communities, or we've managed to reduce some carbon, or we've changed to some renewable energy contracts. You know, those bits are the bits that I really care about. I want to share them because they're real and they're having a real impact.
Yeah, and so going back to the verification, my research found that 86% of organisations report increased stakeholder demand for transparency in GHG reporting. So the demand is definitely there, for sure. Yet only 52% remain they're actually unverified. There's still quite a significant gap there. In your experience, what's been the gap between organisations knowing they should verify and actually doing it, and what do you think closes that gap?
I mean, yeah, without sort of speaking on behalf of other people, but of course I know a lot of people in the industry and regularly connect with my peers. It's a great community of people that I work with, and there's numerous reasons. It could be budget, it could be resource, it could be something as simple as a piece of wording in a contract where a client might say we request versus we require. You know, they can mean a lot, and that's why I'm always in conversation with our clients, whether that be the sales team or the sustainability teams at our clients, to understand their goals and make sure we can all align and work together on what those things are. But yeah, there could be many drivers for that. I do think generally, as we talked about at the beginning, market has to lead it. Government's slightly lagging behind on regulation. So if there isn't a this must happen or this will happen, then there's probably a lag because of that.
Yeah, I think there is a big difference, isn't there, between, you know, organisations wanting to do the right thing, but not necessarily having the budget or the leadership commitment to enable that to happen. And obviously, it's great that Davies are in a position to be able to do that and move forward in terms of progressing from limited assurance through to reasonable assurance. So, yeah, I think obviously it's still quite early days, isn't it? But I think we've certainly seen a shift in terms of drivers. So, for example, B Corp now requires that organisations verify their carbon footprint. And I think with things like the EU Green Claims Directive as well, it's becoming more and more prevalent that businesses kind of practice what they preach.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. In my research, I also identified that there's a significant competitive advantage. And also it was driven by sustainability leadership as one of the most important drivers for verification. So ahead of client or investor requests and regulatory compliance, was competitive positioning part of Davies Group for their business case for verification? And if so, what did that argument look like internally? Because I know it is quite often quite challenging putting your case forward and actually winning that case. What was your experience of that, Gillie?
Yeah, I mean, we did have a contractual requirement to complete this. So at that point, it became quite easy in terms of the client requires us to do this. Okay, otherwise we'll lose the business. Let's go ahead. But I regularly meet with our senior leaders. I sit on the global leadership team for Davies, and I report into our responsible business board committee every quarter, which is a mouthful. And we often talk about what is our appetite, you know, and I think it comes down to materiality. You know, we clearly want to be leading the way in this space, making the difference where it's relevant to us. And I think that's come across not only in things like getting our assurance, but also what is our community impact strategy. You know, we've chosen to focus on education and investment in our communities, and particularly young people and career development, because that is where our expertise sits. So yeah, I think the same thing when it comes to competitiveness, it does come back to that materiality, because you need to be driving what's relevant. But yeah, for us, it was a requirement from a client, which I was happy to ride that wave.
Okay, great. And I think It was interesting seeing in the research that a lot of organisations are doing this for operational reasons to basically improve the quality of the data. And quite often with a verification audit, there will be findings. There are always findings, but then that leads to continued improvement. What would you say has been the most significant finding, from your first verification engagement that then resulted in any type of internal improvements or management of the data going forward?
Yes, I think it's probably, I mean, clarity and transparency has been absolutely game changing. And I'd say probably the biggest area is focusing on our real estate portfolio. We don't own any of our offices. We lease them all. So as we did the footprint and had that data verified and the quality of the data got better, that enabled us to have better conversations with our real estate team, understand how that building worked, whether it be a lease including services or whether it be separate. Is there engagement with the landlord? Is there an opportunity to discuss an energy contract? Can we even segment what energy we're using versus other tenants in the building? And since then, as a result of that, we have set a renewable energy target for all UK offices. So yeah, I think that clear data, better conversations, and then an ability to set a target that's realistic has been brilliant.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I think you're just having confidence in that data, doesn't it? And it sounds like obviously you've been on that journey from in terms of the development of your methods for capturing data, bringing that in-house and dealing with the calculations and reporting to then I think being able to get that independently verified as well. I think it just helps to bring a lot more confidence to the the decisions that you have to make.
Totally.
One of the other areas was about it's interesting. One of the questions that I asked in the survey was about organisations expressing pride in their sustainability progress. And 85% of verified organisations express pride in their sustainability progress. And I guess that's because verification can be a bit of a pat on the back saying, yes, job, you actually did it, correctly. You are being transparent, and it's an opportunity to be able to prove what you're actually doing. And it was interesting to see that only 50% of the unverified businesses didn't feel pride in their progress. I know that obviously it's only early days as far as verification is concerned, but how would you say that verifications potentially change the internal culture and engagement of the sustainability programs at Davies Group?
Yeah, and as someone who's sort of written a sustainability report for the last 6-7 years, I can definitely feel the difference of sort of having your homework marked. I suppose, there's some standards we work to that you send off your communication of progress, but no one looks at it. And I really don't feel like you can take credit for a badge when no one's actually checked that you've done it. And I think it just gives it credibility. I think as sustainability professionals or a responsible business professional and someone who writes those reports, I'm always really reticent of making it sound like we're, bragging about we're doing these wonderful things over here and look over here, isn't it fantastic? But, what is the reality? And there's always a bit of a conflict with anyone writing a report on what the stakeholders want to present versus, what is accurate and true. But I think this is where you have the confidence to say, well, this has been checked by someone who's professional, who's accredited. There is nothing misleading here. So it allows you to be proud, I think, because it is true and factual, and it takes away any of that uncertainty. So yeah, it's a huge benefit from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think especially if you can see reductions year on year, which is obviously the whole point of it, isn't it? So that we can ideally get to net zero. But I know that obviously one of the biggest challenges is the supply chain. And I know that based on the research that I conducted, that the vast majority of organisations that were verified were, larger organisations like Davies Group. And I know that it can be very challenging for small businesses to invest the time, energy and resources into verification. But I know that you've been involved with some projects to support the supply chain. Would you mind just expanding on that, please, Gillie? I know it's not directly relating to verification, but it is certainly in terms of helping them with their first steps in calculating their emissions.
Absolutely, and it's a project we're really proud of, and it was a sort of an industry-wide collaboration with one of our clients and a number of other panel firms. So I think there was about 6 or 7 of us in total who all sponsored, I think it was about 10 each. So we had sort of nearly 100 SMEs who went through a training program on net zero that was provided by a third party. But I joined most of the sessions because I was really interested and wanted to support those suppliers and show that, we really care about this. We're here for you after this program is over, and that they could get to know me and my team as well. We saw a lot of small companies who knew they had to do this, didn't know what to do about it, was sitting on the side of their desk. And what was really beautiful was to see sustainability champions emerge through the process, where people suddenly got really into it and got very excited about getting the right data. We're asking really complicated questions about, well, if I order this part, but then Amazon brings it, am I trying to figure out whether the Amazon driver, what do I need to know where he's come from? And, all these amazing questions about really trying to understand their footprint. We're just going through a bit of feedback on that with those suppliers, but from what I've seen so far, everyone was incredibly appreciative to have that support, to understand, and they really see it as a business advantage that they've been able to do that. And I think it was about 80-90% of them have put together a footprint and created an action plan. And then next steps for them would be thinking about things like verification. So you've helped to set them off on a journey, which will then enrich our reporting. And then this year we've also kicked off a huge training and engagement with our service delivery teams, who are making the decisions about our suppliers. Because it's one thing trying to sort out the supply chain, but if those two conversations aren't meeting in the middle, then you're not really going to get anywhere. So watch this space, because I can't wait to share. We've engaged over 400 employees in our UK property claims on sustainable solutions, getting their ideas, understanding the challenges, and coming out with some outcomes so we can measure the carbon of our claims process and look to reduce it. So watch this space. I'm not saying too much more.
That's absolutely fantastic. But I know when we met about a year ago, I remember you mentioning about getting, as part of your ESG panel to get together as an industry, and I think this is something that other industries can learn from. And I think what you're doing here is, actually, I think you're a pioneer in enabling.
It's a team. We're a team, yeah.
Absolutely, yes, and driving it not independently as an organisation, but as a sector. And I think other sectors could really learn a lot from this. Not just other professional services, but other sectors as well, because, we have got such a long way to go to get to net zero. And this is just the beginning, isn't it? Just calculating carbon footprint. And obviously organisations like Davies have been able to do this for some time, have the resources and are doing a great job. But obviously it's great that you're now taking the lead in supporting your supply chain as well to do the same thing.
Yeah, it's a big task.
Yeah.
But I think if I was to give anyone advice listening of thinking about how you go about that, looking at where your highest emitting suppliers are. People have been looking at spend-based data for a long time, and you were asking about specific moments. I remember we have a law firm as part of our group, and I was talking to some industry peers about how to reduce emissions, and we were talking about their biggest spend, which was the practicing certificates for the lawyers, which cost a lot of money, I would imagine. And they were like, how do we reduce the carbon? I was like, but hang on a minute, just because you're spending a lot, if you think about what's happening, someone checking in a database that a lawyer is registered and then issuing a certificate, which I presume is sent by email, there's probably not a lot of emissions associated with that activity versus your IT supplier, or, if you've got a contractor network, building, mending, fixing, shipping, whatever it is. So I think really focusing your supply chain effort on your biggest emissions rather than your biggest spend is a good way to go about it, and just tackle little groups. You're not going to do it all at once.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's great advice for our iSocial listeners. I think there's some organisations think that their data isn't good enough, or they're not quite there yet, and they don't necessarily know where. In some cases, don't even know where to begin. But I think that's great advice, because that's where you're going to make the biggest difference, isn't it? If you're looking at the largest emitters. So just finally looking ahead, I mean, where do you see the expectations of institutional partners and large clients in the insurance and professional services heading? And at what point do you think that verified greenhouse gas data becomes a non-negotiable baseline in your market?
Yeah, and I suppose there's a number of levers or factors that might influence that. I mean, we've all been waiting with bated breath for numerous regulations in numerous jurisdictions to come in and stall and then come again and change and alter. And I think we're always sort of waiting for that. But I think businesses have done a really good job, particularly in our industry, of stepping up and saying, well, this is what we stand for. This is what we want. I think the media doesn't help. I'd say, speaking with sustainability professionals at the moment, there's the perception that it's sort of gone off the boil and it's gone quiet. And there's been a few articles about the fact that there aren't chief sustainability officers anymore. But when you look at those organisations, they're not taking them away, they're embedding them deeper. So it's becoming the responsibility of the chief operating officer to ensure that those sustainability targets are met. So I think the message is quite different. We're also not seeing any slowdown in our client RFP, bid, audit assessments on sustainability, even from jurisdictions like the US. So yeah, I mean, it's the future. I'd love to be able to predict it, but the momentum I'm seeing at the moment is that it's not slowing down. And that need to verify is only going to grow, I think, to make sure you have that proper data. What we do need is, as you were talking about before, to shift away from the counting, this is the beginning, and get into the action. And that is what I am trying to drive right now. What will change those numbers, particularly when we're a growing business and our baseline will get bigger and bigger, we need to assess our performance and make sure that we're stewarding our emissions in the most effective way.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks very much for sharing those insights into the future. I think I'd just like to end with just asking you one final question, because I know that obviously we've been talking about GHG emissions predominantly here in this conversation, but I know that you're responsible for much wider ESG responsibilities, and I'd be interested to hear what is there one aspect in particular that you're most proud of in terms of your role at Davies over the last few years that you'd like to share with us?
Oh gosh, well, yeah, wasn't expecting that one. Well, I'm incredibly proud of the entire team. We are a very small and mighty team, and we collaborate incredibly well with the business. I'd say our social impact is something that I'm incredibly proud of. Working with my team, we've sort of restructured, reframed our focus on a community investment. When it was established, we were in one country. As I said at the beginning, we're now 22 countries, and we've really focused our resources, our time, our effort on impacting community education, skills development, which I think will have a full circle round to attracting talent into our industry. And I really can't wait to share some of the things that we're doing there, working with young people and having a bunch of young people come into the office and learn about careers and break down some of those barriers. Like that's not work. That's just, an honour, really.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've been having a look at some of your recently on LinkedIn, and I know that you've been posting a lot on social impact and the work that you've been doing in that area, and also celebrating the work that others have been doing as well. So yeah, I'd definitely check out Gillie Fairbrother's LinkedIn profile, if you don't mind me saying so, Gillie.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Great. Okay, well that's all we've got time for today, but it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experience with us today. I'm sure it's been really helpful for a lot of our podcast listeners to the show today. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.